5, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's happening? So I see on Facebook the outro. No, now I see myself. Okay, on Facebook. Facebook. And yeah, I see YouTube. All right, Reverend Kim, I see you. Oh, you get it? Okay. All right. Yep, I see it. All right, Reverend Kim, what the rest of you what the rest of the posses? What the rest of the folk that need to be on? My, my, my. My, my, my. Yeah, no problem. What's going on, Reverend Kim? Type something in. I see you said good evening. Okay, that's good. It is a good evening. Okay. Volume good. Hey, there's Donna. Hey, Donna. How you doing? All right. We've got folk coming in physically. We got some folk creeping in virtually. Creeping in. Hey, hey, good to see you. All right. We're going to have a word of prayer and we're going to get started. God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the technology. Thank you for the technicians. Thank you for those who are gathering virtually and in person. Now we pray for your spirit as always to give us guidance and clarity, insight and understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, good to see you back in the line, Donna and Reverend Kim. And so I don't see anybody yet on the Facebook, the Book of Faces, as Mike Carson calls it. But we'll see as time goes on. We will see. We will see. We will see. Okay, so we are looking at the book "Let Your Life Speak" by Parker Palmer, and we are walking through Psalm 139. So we're going to start out with Psalm 139, and then we're going to switch lanes and move into some of the few of the insights from Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak. So Psalm 139, we started out last week with the first 5 verses. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. So we looked at, that was first 6 verses last week of Psalm 139. Now we're going to look at the next 6 verses, 7 through 12. And and they read, hey there, Jeanette, good to see you. And so I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, and it reads, Mama Inez, good to see you. Good to see you. Psalm 139, I'm starting with the 7th verse. I'm going to go to the 12th verse. It reads, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. We are walking through some deep waters in the sense of what the writer attributed to David here, this Psalm 139. As I shared on last week, Psalm 139 was a favorite of the late great Dr. Howard Thurman. Yeah, it is. It seems to be going in and out. Try the yellow one. Okay. One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, yeah, as I said on last week, I was sharing that Psalm 139 is a favorite of Dr. Howard Thurman, as he would read it in such a way that when you heard him speaking passionately, and he included it in I know at least one of his books, if not 2 or 3, because it is an important meditation piece. Okay, we're picking up now. Again, we're picking up from from the book by Kurt Byron Jones that we did before our break, Holy Play, that dealt with purposes, that we have many purposes in life. And now we're walking through the concept of vocation. Now they are pretty much the same, except looking at them from a different way. Kurt Byron Jones was helping us understand that we have many purposes in life that God opens up and allows us to engage in, while Parker Palmer is helping us walk through the discernment of vocation in life. And Psalm 139 is a companion to that, which helps us then begin to look at the intimacy that we have with God. This psalm is an intimate psalm because it shows not just the very closeness of God to us, but it demonstrates how vulnerable we are to the presence of God. And so in that first 6 verses that we looked at last week, when the psalmist talks about, Lord, you have known me and searched me, and you know my thoughts from afar. So in other words, before I even have a thought, you already know the thought that I'm about to have. He says, you know the words before they reach my tongue. In other words, even before I'm able to vocalize a word, you knew it already. And so he says, you know when I sit down and when I rise up. And so God is acquainted, God is familiar, God is intimate with all of our ways. When we say the word ways, it's just not the behaviors, but it is the intimations and the movements and moods of the very heart and soul. So God is acquainted with every aspect of our being, especially those aspects that we think we keep a secret from everybody. And so it is quite powerful to begin to see this intimacy that we have with God that we oftentimes, most of the time, do not take advantage of because we don't understand the value of the vulnerability and intimacy that we have with God. I see you, Deacon Annette and Kathleen. And so here David, again, last week talked about, God acquainted with his ways. And then in this section, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are. Those of you who have the King James Version, I want you to read verse 8 and then tell me what it says when it says, if I make my bed, does it say in hell? I want you to type that in virtually, and those of you who are here present, if you have the King James or the New King James or even the NIV, I want you to tell me what that word is from the translation that you are reading. That's verse 8. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in, what does your translation say? You are there. I'm going to come back to that. That's verse 8. And then he says, if I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. Now again, and we're going to come back to that verse 8 I asked you about. Now again, this psalmist says, where can I go from your spirit? Now the question we have to ask ourselves, did this psalmist actually try to escape the very presence of God? Or is this psalmist musing, ruminating on the thought of getting away from the presence of God? We don't know what it is, but I want to hazard a suggestion that it may be a bit of both. The psalmist may have actually believed that some way, somehow, that they could hide themselves from the very presence of God, that they could do some things in the dark that God would not see, that they could behave in certain ways that they believe that God would not know about. I want to suggest that it is a little of both, that sometimes we think that some things we do, we say, we think, and places we go are beyond the actual presence, the very vision, the very sight, the very the very presence of God. We think that we are out of God's reach in some areas of our behavior. I want to suggest that it is a little bit of both. And so why would someone want to be out of the very presence of God? Why would somebody want to hide some aspects of their behavior, of their mindset, of their goings and comings from God? Well, it is quite obvious some things that we do, some things that are, we know would gain scrutiny from the society around us, from the internal circles that we have of close relationships and family members. There are some things that we know that we may engage in that might not fly too well with those around us. And so therefore, there are some things that we think we keep secret, and so we do them under the cover, literally and figuratively. And so Sunday, I tried to do a joke when I was talking about the revelation in perception that the psalmist of 42 had. I said I was pointing out that the psalmist in Psalm 42 had a revelation of a perception about God, because as you remember, the psalmist, the phrase is, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why are you disturbed within me? Put your hope in God." And I was pointing out that that psalmist was away from Jerusalem, away from the temple, away from the familiar faces of those that psalmist normally worship with. They were away from all of that in exile. And I pointed out that there are scholars who point out that after the Babylonian exile, because the people had been in exile way longer than they ever imagined, their perception of God had changed. And the perception of God had once been that you only can find God in the house of the Lord, the temple, that the temple was the holiest place, and that was where God dwelled, in the temple. In Psalm 42, the psalmist begins to opine and begins to reflect in bitterness in some ways about how that psalmist, who was a worship leader, used to go and lead the people into the house of God, into the temple with praising and whatnot. And then the psalmist says, "I am depressed because they're no longer in Jerusalem. They can no longer go to the temple." I was pointing out that after the Babylonian exile, many of the scholars pointed out that the perception of God had shifted from just in the temple, the church, that God was everywhere. And you can worship God any and everywhere, and that is the beginning of what is called synagogue worship, where people would set up synagogues that were away from the temple, because then they recognize that God is everywhere, and everywhere you are is worship ground. And so as I was making that point, I said everywhere is holy because God is holy, and God created everything. Everywhere is holy. You ain't got to get to the church to worship God, to be in the presence of God like that psalmist wanted want it to be. Wherever you are, when you wake up in the morning, you are in the very presence of God, and it is a moment that you ought to worship. When you are asleep, you are still in the presence of God, and even sleep can become a form of worship. Worship happens everywhere because God is everywhere, and everywhere is holy and sacred. It messes up the theology of some people because some people think that you come into the church, you come into the sanctuary, and you are now on holy ground and you act a certain way. No! Everywhere you go, you are on holy ground. And so I tried to make a jokey joke, and I said, even in the hotel room, for some people, you know, you were on holy ground. You may have been doing unholy things. It didn't go over well Sunday, and they see it ain't going over well right now. It is holy ground. It's everywhere. And even in the crack house, it's holy ground, but there's unholy things going on holy ground, which is another revelation that even folk that believe only in the sanctuary of the church is holy ground, even folk that believe that, many of those folk do unholy things in holy spaces because they gossip about people, they badmouth other people, they become critical and criticizing about what goes on in the church on holy ground as if that is acceptable to God. No, worship is not about your grievances and your problems and your peeves. Worship is an attitude. It's not a space. It's not a place. I'm sorry, it's a space. Worship is a space within you. And so when the temple of you is tarnished, we do unholy things here because we belong to God on holy ground. And so the psalmist here in Psalm 139 is throwing out, where can I go from your presence? The presence of God is everywhere. This is intimacy, y'all. Don't usually, unless you have a small child who may do this, no one goes into the bathroom with you, or unless you're in a public bathroom. And even there are stalls and doors that you close. So generally, no one goes into the bathroom with you when you are taking care of bodily hygiene. But God is there. It's holy space. Where can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from you? That ought to be a wake-up call to not only us who have perceptions of the church and sanctuary that are limited because of the way we have been taught, trained, experienced about church. You know, the old saints would say, children ain't got no business up in the pulpit. I remember some folk almost had a conniption when one time when we used to do the ritual of friendship, and we would go around and shake each other's hand and give each other a hug, and some of the children came up into the pulpit because they wanted to shake the pastor's hand, and they just were curious. They wanted to get up in the pulpit, and I said, come on up in the pulpit. And I had some members after church say, I just didn't like children running back or walking back and forth on the pulpit like that, Pastor. I said, they were in good space. They were all right. And so I didn't have a problem with it. And guess what? God ain't got a problem with it. Why? Because we think that certain things, you know, are so holy And that's the way the folk in Jerusalem used to think. There were certain spaces, even in the sanctuary, where only certain people could go. There was the place called the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest could go there. Everybody couldn't go there. Women were out in the outer court. The women couldn't even go into the inner court. And so even their mindset about God, holiness, and the presence of God was segregating as if God was like them. And that's why scholars point out that much of the view, not all of it changed, but a lot of the view about the presence of God, the perception changed. And so some of our perceptions are right now even being a little jarred, and some of us are never going to move from where we think, but that's okay too. But it is also a revelation to our political situation that there are some folk that think that they are out of the presence of God because they have attained to certain positions of power right now in this nation. That they could do things, they could make deals in the dark as if God doesn't see, because they are in the dark of a back room making deals and policy against people. They believe that what they say in the dark, in the back room, the things they really say about the people that voted for them, because they were fooled into thinking that whiteness is more desirable than equity. They think that in that back room, what they say really about those people, that even though the people that voted for them don't know, they think God don't know. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And what the psalmist is giving us the picture of, the psalmist does something incredible. The psalmist looks at, first of all, the farthest vertical regions, the vertical regions. The psalmist, the farthest vertical limits. The psalmist says, if I ascend to heaven, God, you are there. And if I make my bed, that's interesting, the word bed. He said, if I ascend to heaven, but he said, if I make my bed, what does that mean? In other words, if I make such a mess of my life, if I make my bed because of my hubris, my stubbornness, my attitude of contrariness, if I make my bed, and I thank you. Now, what did you all get the word? If I make my bed where? What did y'all say? What did your translation say? I was looking for King James, New King James, NIV. What did you say? What did you say? Okay, thank you. Okay, and Donna, Mama Inez, Jeanette, your translation said hell. Now, I want you to see, first of all, as a practical thing, that something that I've said many times, that translating from an old language to what we now call English is problematic. So when your scriptures say hell, what you and I and most of us think about is the place where the devil resides, the imps of devil. We think of fire, brimstone, hot, burning. We think of torture. We think of the screams and all of the pictures of hell that we have been conditioned, taught, and educated to think, which is not what this said. So the word really shouldn't be hell. The word is Sheol. Now, in the Old Testament, Hebrew and whatnot, understanding, Sheol is just a place for the dead. Sheol is a place. It is a place. It is a place without color. It is a bland place. It is a place for the dead. Okay. So there are different words in the old languages for what we want to talk about as hell, and what we would categorize as hell. And so when David, the writer of this psalm, he's not talking about if I make my bed with the devil in the burning fires of hell. He said if I make my bed in Sheol, the place, the holding place. In the Catholic branch of the faith, it might be called purgatory. It is the holding place. It is the waiting place, which, it brings up some other things we have to talk about, and well, not have to talk about now, but things that we need to think about, as some of these thoughts will then say, when does a person get to heaven? Are they sleeping in a holding place? Are they in a place where they are, they are in, or do they automatically go? So, but for our discussion right now, David is giving us the furthest vertical regions of where he might escape from God. It says, if I ascend to heaven, well, you're going to be there. But if I make my bed in Sheol, you're also in the farthest region, as in their understanding, the farthest region of one can go, what we would call down. They are down as far as you can go. And so even if you still have the image of hell as fire and brimstone, what this text is showing us that God is there too. In other words, there is no place that God is not. So even if you believe, from your translations that the word H-E-L-L is that place, hell, the place of torment and all of that. Even if you believe that, what the text is telling us is that God is even there. So we after our physical bodies have deteriorated to the point where the spirit has to leave. And even if we believe, as some of us do, that based on the behavior of some people, we say they're going to bust hell wide open. Well, the fact of the matter is that they still will be with God. I'm telling you, I did a series of sermons in the Crusader, a series of articles in the Crusader. What you didn't learn in Sunday school, because Sunday school is great, but there's another step in our spiritual education, our biblical education. And so what the psalmist is pointing out, hey there, Pam and Jeanette, the psalmist is pointing out that even in hell, you meet God's presence. Those are the farthest vertical limits. But then the psalmist talks about the four corners of the earth. So the psalmist says, if I take the wings of the morning and settle in the farthest parts of the sea. I want you to think about this. The wings of the morning. In other words, what do wings do? They lift one up. And so what the psalmist is alluding to is the wings of the morning are the east, where the sun is rising. If I take the wings of the morning in the east, if I go to the east where the wings of the morning are, or then the psalmist says, and fly to the farthest parts of the sea. Am I right about it? He says, if I take the wings of the morning and settle in the farthest parts of the sea, that's the west. He says, if I go to the east or if I go to the farthest parts of the west. Then he says, your hand shall lead me. That's the north. And your right hand, that's the south, shall hold me. Your hand, he says, your hand, that's the north, shall lead me. And your right hand, that's the south, shall hold me fast. The 4 points of the compass, the psalmist is saying, are still inhabited by God. I'm going to go to Jonah 1:3. Jonah 1:3. Jonah 1:3. I'm going to go to Jonah. Jonah. Come on, Jonah. Jonah, the first chapter and the third verse. Well, I'm going to read from the first verse. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. God is talking to Jonah. But Jonah, verse 3, set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid his fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came up the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out. So my point is this. Jonah tried to flee from the presence of God. And in fleeing from the presence of God, now this is why I like some of the other translations like the NIV, the King James, and the New King James. Because it will say Jonah went down to Tarshish, trying to get away from the presence of God. Then it'll say Jonah went down into a ship, trying to get away from the presence of God. And the ship went down into the sea because he's trying to get away from the presence of God. And a storm arises, and we know what happened. They threw things off, and then they realized that the storm wouldn't stop, and they figured out somebody had upset their God, and they began to query people, and Jonah was keeping silent, and they said, what about you? What you do could cause all of this? And he said, well, I've been trying to get away from my God. And that's when they had to throw him overboard, and he went down into the belly of a great fish. In other words, what the text is saying is when you try to get away from the presence of God, your life begins to go down. I want to go to Job 26. Job 26. Job 26. Job. Come on, Job. Come on, Job. My man, Job. Job 26. I'm going to read the 6th verse. Job 26. And Job says, verse 6, Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. Sheol, there's that word. Now in your Bibles, it will say hell. Hell is naked before God. What Job, what Jonah, and what the psalmist of 139 are pointing out is that God is inescapable. The presence of God you cannot get away from. So not only the things that you think on your mind and the and the very mood of your heart are all clear as day and audible as a loudspeaker to God, but your behavior wherever you go, even in the worst place you can think of, doing the worst thing that you can do, you are still in the presence of God. Intimacy. And then he says, if I say the darkness shall become, if what does he say? He says, if I surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night. Even in the dark. What things go on in the dark? What do we turn? We turn the lights off to go to sleep. But what else do we turn the lights off to do? Okay, all right. Y'all know where I'm going from that. Yeah, okay. We keep it clean, okay? Some of us, exactly. We don't do blue. In other words, let's not be real honest. Let's not be that honest. But whatever it is we do when we turn the lights off, other than sleep, the lights have no effect on the presence of God seeing just like it is day. So whatever it is, God is there, God sees, and God knows. And that is intimacy, that the best thing we could do in this life is to embrace the fact that God not only knows what we think, what we say, when we get up, when we sit down, the thoughts of our mind, and wherever we go, God is there. God knows all of the little of the messiness of our lives, the pettiness of our lives, the meanness of our spirits at times and our souls, and the hate in our heart, the bitterness we carry against some people. God knows all of it. The point is that God still loves us. See, if the person that you call friend, if the person that you call spouse, if the person that you call sibling, the person that you call parent is the person that you're closest to knew everything you thought, they might not be friends with you. They might have a family falling out with you. There might be some marital problems that you encounter if they knew everything you thought. In fact, it would cause conflict with every relationship you have if those people that you hold dearest and closest knew everything you thought and every emotion of your heart. Some of those people would say, you know what? You and I can't get out no more because you got some stuff in you that just kind of sends some bad vibes in me. Now, that very same person, you would have to know what's in their heart and their mind, and you would say the same thing to them. But God knows it all, and God still loves us. God still has mercy on us, and God looks beyond our faults to see our need. So now, Parker Palmer in Let Your Life Speak starts out by reading a bit of a narrative about the vision of vocation. He says, now I become myself. It's taken time, many years and places. I have been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces. What a long time it can take to become the person one has always been. How often in the process we mask ourselves in faces that are not our own. So, Paul Laurence Dunbar said, we wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. But let the world be otherwise. We wear the mask. What Parker Palmer is pointing out is that we all wear masks throughout our lives to not only hide our true selves, but also to become someone we were not born to be. We wear masks. And so he challenges, because he walks through his journey to help us see. Now, he challenges us to think about when you were growing up, when you were an adolescent. Think about the things that you thought you wanted to become. Think about the images of acceptability that you wore. Because people said, from parents to school teachers to people in your neighborhood, that to get ahead in life, to have a gainful life, to have gainful employment, to live a life of respectability, acceptability, you had to be a certain way. And so there were places, there were schools that we went to, and think about the people that were the popular people that some of us wanted to be like. We would wear a mask. That mask would be somebody else. We wanted to be like certain popular people. We wanted to be in certain groups as we began to matriculate in our adolescent years, because again, nobody wanted to stand out. Nobody wanted to be the loner. Nobody wanted to be the nerd. Nobody wanted to be the person that was different from how the group was. And so I know we were taught about peer pressure and all of that, but there was some peer pressure that even our parents accepted, as long as that peer pressure was the peer pressure that would move us to the ascent of life in this country, so that we would get in with the right people who had the right connections, and their family and associates would get us in the right spaces so we could earn the right amount of money and get the right car, the right house, and wear the right clothes, have the right job, and all of that stuff. And we had to wear a mask. Think about in your young teen years, what is it you wanted to do with your life? What did you want to be? You know how when you grew up, what do you want to be when you grow up? Think about, in school, every now and then we would have an instructor, a teacher who would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then, they listen to all the things that people in the classroom would say. And then they would start talking to us about the acceptable places. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a scientist. You can become president. All of these things, think about the things that we tried to fit ourselves in. What is it you wanted to be? I just want you to think about it. We're not all together, so we can't really just go around the room and whatnot. But what is it you wanted to be when you were adolescent? What was it that grabbed your attention as you watched television? Or did you want to be a model? Did you want to be an astronaut? Did you want to be a cowboy? Did you want to be a police officer? What did you want to be what grabbed your attention when you read Ebony magazine and Jet magazine? Did you want to be an actor? Did you want to be an actress? Did you want to be a performer? Did you want to be a singer? Did you want to be an artist? Did you want to be a dancer? Think about the things that you wanted to be as an adolescent and a teenager. The things that you wanted to be. I remember in the mid-teens, well, somewhere around 14, 15, 16, especially around 15 and 16, we would hear older folk. When I say older folk, I'm talking about people in their 20s that, we would interact with in the neighborhood and things like that. And then older adults, older than that, in their 40s and whatnot, and maybe some in their 50s. In Chicago, a lot of people would talk about getting a job with the CTA because the CTA paid good money. And so, and I remember myself and the guys I hung out with, we used to talk about, yeah, man, if I can get a job with the CTA, drive a bus, and make that long paper. It was all about the long paper, But again, is that what your soul was saying? So what Parker Palmer says, now, for us right now, we can begin to think back. But one thing he says we could also do is, many of us have grandchildren, young nieces and nephews. He says, begin to study infants and very young children that are in your circle. Begin to look at them. He says, because those infants and young children, they come here already with what he calls the birthright gift of self. They come here already positioned for the destiny, the vocation they are meant to be. And that was from God. He says, they are not raw material to be shaped or directed in a path we might want them to take. They arrive with their own gifted form, their own gifted soul, which is in the image of God. He says, we already come here with our vocation. And if you study young children, it begins to leak out their personality and some of the things that pull them. So when as last week we looked at, don't tell your soul what you want to do. Let your soul tell you what it wants to do through you. Howard Thurman says, don't ask the world for what it needs. Find out what it is that makes you come alive and go do that, because the world needs people that come alive. Parker Palmer says, your great gladness. What is it that gives you great gladness? What is it when you were young that gave you great gladness? When you were a toddler, what is it that gave you great gladness? He says, do that, because that's what the world needs. I've shared with you all before that the word education comes from the Latin educere, and what the word means is to pull out, not to put in. And what has happened with me, what's happened with you, what's happened with just about every child in these yet to be United States is we have been trained to put into our children what we think is best for them, rather than pull out of them what God put in them and let it be. So teachers and educators are not supposed to be giving anybody anything. You are supposed to be pulling out of them what God has already put in them. That is the wisdom that is there, the knowledge, the inclination, the proclivities, the things that they are drawn to and repel. You are supposed to be pulling out of them what is there already. Because no child born is a mistake. And no child born is evil. That happens So this thing about vocation. Vocation is not a goal to be achieved, but a gift to be received. Accepting the treasure of true self that you already possess. Vocation does not come from voices outside of us. Vocation comes from within us. It is a calling to be the person you were born to be, to fulfill the original selfhood that you were given at birth by God. Vocation. Can you look at what you have been doing in your life up to now? And can you say that this is what I was meant to do? Is this your life? Or have you been wearing the faces of other people and other people's expectations? In this nation, it's very hard. African culture, we have manhood, womanhood training. It is rites of passage, in other words. And what happens is that children, male and female, go through a process. It's not a day process or even a week process. It takes a while. They go through a process so that what is in them, they will trust. But here, that's not how we are socialized. We extract other people's thoughts from books, from things that our parents, our teachers, our preachers, or people in our community, we take those things from the television to the newspaper. We take the thoughts of other people, we rank them, and then we try to take the best of those and be like them. And we also are taught to hold down who we really are. Especially black people in this nation. So what we are actually looking at is, in this very time where the political chaos and the threat is so dire, is so dangerous, we have to now begin to embrace the vulnerability that we have with God and the intimacy with God, that God is everywhere and God knows us better than anybody, because that is relationship. And that God placed something, as Paul would say, a treasure in clay jars. So that we can now chart a course where we no longer are looking for the approval of people outside of us, but we are now going deep inside of us to seek the guidance from God and the appreciation of what God has already done within us. Black people have been too long in this nation not trying to be African and investigate all that it means to be African, the good and the bad, an understanding of who we are. Why do you think we're doing this? But this takes intentional and difficult work, because especially for those of us who are over 40 years old, many of our beliefs and our perceptions become hardened, and we don't want to change. And we don't want to accept the person we really are. That's why you hear some people say, well, people just going to have to accept me the way I am. And you're not really talking about the you that you were supposed to be. You're talking about the you that all of these other faces you have worn. And now you use a defense mechanism. And so now I want to wrap up with this thing where Parker Palmer talks about there's a journey into darkness. It's the pilgrimage that we must take. Now, the journey into darkness and what he described it, he talked about when he went off to school. He talked about at one point he went to Union Theological Seminary. He thought he was going to be a preacher. He thought he was going to be a pastor. And he said it was about a year into that the Spirit told him, I don't want you to be nobody's pastor. You're not to be in the ministry that way. And so then he goes out to Berkeley on the West Coast. And Berkeley during the late 60s was a very hotbed of revolution, resistance, and all of that. And so he was studying to be a teacher. He was going for his PhD. And so he gets his PhD, but the academy doesn't feel good to him. So he leaves Berkeley and goes to New York and becomes a community organizer. And as a community organizer, he still found himself doing what he believes is a part of his calling, his vocation was teaching. But the problem was he was organizing people to be community, but he had never experienced community. He points out, he says, I am a white male. And he says, as a white male in this nation, I am not raised to be in community. I'm raised to have autonomy. And so what he found out was being a community organizer, even though it was great work for him and it fed the teaching aspect of him, he didn't know what real community was. So he left New York and went to a Quaker community. And he sat in community with Quakers where you shared meals together. You shared all of this together. You made decisions together. And for 10 years, his vocation became clear. He began to think back as a child how he used to put little pieces together about how airplanes flew, and he remembered stapling pieces of paper together as a little book. And part of his vocation was making books, teaching people in community outside of the academy. Because in the academy, he would be hampered and hindered too much by the structure. And in community, he could then develop new ways of helping to pull out of people. So the journey into darkness was the pilgrimage through these different areas to get to the place that God had already ordained for him. When I was I can't tell you the whole thing because it's going to take too long, but when I got into college, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I decided, because we had to pick a major, I was going to aspire to be a judge. The curriculum counselor that I had, I will never forget her name, Miss Jean Buck, white woman, middle-aged white woman. I remember that because when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I saw myself there. Because Jean Buck told me, you can't be a judge. I'm in college, Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. She said, you are never going to be a judge. You need to think of something else, son. Now, I'm like, I don't know. She said, what about law enforcement? And so that's when I got into the major of criminal justice. Because I said, well, I'm going to show Miss Buck. I'm going to become a law enforcement agent officer and then move up to become a judge. And so I leave SIU, don't even finish getting my degree. I come here, I go to St. Xavier University. It was not a university, it was a college, so I didn't have to declare a major. And then I spent a year there because I was on academic probation. And then after that year, I go to Loyola University in Chicago, the Water Tower campus downtown, and I take the major administrative justice, which was the same as criminal justice. Now, I still didn't see myself becoming a police officer. And so while I am going through this pilgrimage of darkness, I'm in class. I am like 22, 23 years old. The students are all 17 and 18. I'm feeling like the old man of the group. It was a pilgrimage of darkness. And so I spend when I should have been graduating. So I should have been graduating a long time ago. So I went into college in 1978. I should have went in 1977. And 4 years later, I should have been coming out. But I went in late in 1978, should have been coming out 4 years later. It took me 10 years to get a bachelor's degree. So I come out in 1988. I have been working in factories now. I'm making auto products in one factory for 3.5 years, and I made candy for another 3.5 years at Brock Candy Company. Pilgrimage of darkness. Now, all along the way, there were breadcrumbs of my vocation. Because while I was working in the factories and going to school at night, I would hang out with my homies or in going to church, and I was theologizing and talking about the deeper issues of faith with other people. I was studying those things, even though I was supposed to be studying these things. And one of the tipping points that I didn't get right away is, while I was working in the factory, I had to serve on a jury. It was a murder case, and I've told you all this before. And so I got chosen, and I was so mad, and I didn't realize that this was breadcrumbs God was trying to pull me back to where I was supposed to be. And so on the jury, we were hearing this case of a young black guy who was they were trying to charge him with first-degree murder. He had got into a scuffle, and he didn't mean to, but he ended up killing somebody. They got into a scuffle. It was, some of the gang turf stuff and whatnot. But he had not been in trouble before, and a lot of stuff. And so as we heard the case, then we go back into the room to deliberate. And I never will forget. They started out because so it was like a Thursday, and so we go into deliberations on Friday, and they wanted to get out because they didn't want to be sequestered for the weekend. And so immediately they started taking the vote, guilty, 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 guilty. And I said, no. I can't do guilty. And we started talking about the case, and we deliberated, I don't know, for several hours. And it was getting to that point where the judge was going to say, okay, we're going to cut it off. Y'all going to be sequestered for the weekend. Now, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about, wait a minute, how are you all just going to put first-degree murder on this dude and what that comes with? And so I think the other one was manslaughter, second degree and manslaughter. And I was like, manslaughter and whatnot. And so we were going back and forth, and I kept arguing what the facts showed. And finally, the rest of the group began to say, okay, we can see that. Now, whether they gave in because they didn't want to be sequestered or whether they gave in because the argument was sound, I don't know. But immediately when we gave our verdict, the judge said, I need you all to come into my chambers. So all of us went into the chambers, and the judge said, I couldn't interfere, but that was the right verdict. And then the judge laid out the arguments that I had made. As we were leaving out, there was an older black gentleman. He was in his 60s. Now I'm in my mid to late 20s. And we're both walking out together. It just happened to be that way. And he looks over at me. He says, young man, are you a preacher? I said, no, sir. I work in a factory. He said, son, you a preacher. And he kept going. And I'm like, what is this guy talking? My point is this. that once I got on the police department, these things started raising up again. And then a door opened up because the bottom dropped out at one point. And when the bottom dropped out, pilgrimage of darkness, the door opened for ministry. So what Parker Palmer and what the psalmist is challenging us to really do is look at our life. Look at the journey so far. Then begin to think about what gave you great gladness when you were young. Now, if you are plus 60 or plus 50, and you maybe even retired, it is still not too late to embrace what God put in you. Because there is the peace, the rest, the serenity that will come. We're going to stop. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any comment. Donna said, like we do as children from our parents, a backwards way of respect. Ah, my God. And, okay, okay, Donna, nurse. That's what it is, nurse. Okay. And see, think about. See, what is it the calling is for? See, the calling is never for you to make a bunch of money. It's never for you to have the vocation. It's never for you to chase the money or chase the position for the prestige. The calling, the vocation is for you to impact other people's lives so that they can then connect to their true self. And in doing that, there is the provision that you will then get because of that. Because you're focused on that. It doesn't mean that you ain't going to run into problems, or you're not going to deal with the pilgrimage of darkness, or you're not going to deal with frustrations that people can bring. But what it is, that the final result is that, so he gives an example of a Jewish theologian. And the Jewish theologian he was an older man, and he was telling a bunch of younger persons, he said, let's just say his name was let's say his name was Joshua, and he said, when I get to the other side after I pass away, he said, I am not going to be asked, how come you didn't become Moses? No, they're going to ask me, how come you didn't become Joshua? See, the objective is to become that which you were born to be, and whatever that vocation, that calling from the soul is, it is to now have impact. That might come from nursing, that might come from teaching, that might come from music, that might come from painting, that might come from dancing, it might come from being an attorney, it might come from these different titles that we gain. But the objective is that when you encounter and interact with people, that you will help people become more of who they were born to be. Okay. Donna says, thank you, Pastor, for keeping hope alive, well and achievable. God is so good. We're going to end right there. We'll pick it up in Psalm 139. We're going to go to the next few verses in it. So I'm just saying, read the whole 139 in moments where you have, just a couple minutes. It doesn't take but a minute or two. Read them slowly, though. Don't try to rush through it, and try to embrace each and every thought that David is lifting up, and meditate on the thoughts that jump out to you. Those that resonate to you, even if they're not within the block of verses that we are looking at, if they are outside. And I want you to share them next week, and then continue on with Parker Palmer. Now, what I just did was I just gave the bullet points of Parker Palmer's second chapter. We did the first chapter last week. Again, I'm not reading the book. I need you all to read the book and pull out points on your own. All I'm going to give are bullet points of the chapters, okay? And so we will then look to next week. I hope it was helpful. I hope it's been beneficial, because we need to be who we were called to be more than ever now, because the attack that we're under, and as I was sharing this morning with the midday Bible class, we have been shown that what we expected whiteness to be is not what it is. We thought that people, non-melanated people, believed what the country said are the values of this nation. Don't lie, don't be a bully, don't manipulate people. It's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. All those things that this nation taught us about being good people. We thought they believed that. What we found out is, no, they don't believe that. What they believe and what they hold on to because they feel somehow threatened is whiteness. And so if it meant sacrificing other people who were melanated, then they would do that to preserve whiteness. Okay? And so that then now opens the door, as the bottom drops out, it opens the door for us to say, we embrace blackness, Africanity, and this intimacy that David talked about, another African that we have with God who knows us and who has implanted in us what another African, Paul said, are treasures in clay jars. Okay? And that means community is important. Another subject we're going to keep going on. So thank you all. We are going to stop right there. We're going to have a word of closing prayer. God, I give you praise, honor, and glory for being God all by yourself. Now, please allow your spirit to tarry with us as we leave from the space right now, both virtually and physically, this encounter we're having with your word about us. Now, bless us in the balance of this night, because we gathered at the beginning of the night to be about your business. And when we lay our heads on the pillow, we pray that we will not just achieve sleep, but that we will get rest that comes from you leading us by still waters. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. All right. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you all so much.